Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Dodgers Dawgs as part of the Dodgers Daily Network. My name is Austin Brubaker. I will be your host today on another Monday afternoon here, in which case now with these Mondays, we have Dodgers baseball to talk about, and I'm super excited to be talking about that. The Dodgers just wrapped up a game today against the Cincinnati Reds, which is why the stream got out a little bit later than what it normally does. Typically on Mondays, we go on at 5:15, calling a little bit of an audible during spring training when these games are going to happen early, in which case I will be going live as soon as the game gets over until I'm able to continue going out. So today we'll be able to go live for about 45-ish minutes or so, just talking a little bit about the game today, as well as some just overall thoughts that I've had as the Dodgers have just started with spring training. So super excited to be joining with you guys. But as you have noticed, I am back at my home studio here in the great state of Michigan, which means I have left Arizona, I have left Camelback Ranch, and I just wanted to start the show to just talk a little bit about some of my experience, some of the things that I was able to see both on the field and on the backfield, and then we'll dive into a little bit of the spring training storylines. First off, if you have not had the chance to go to spring training, go to Camelback Ranch, which this was my first time going to Dodgers spring training. It's awesome. You should definitely go and experience that. It is an experience in spring training unlike many other spring training experiences, and the immersion that you get into the culture of the Dodgers there is really awesome to be able to partake in. So I had the opportunity to be able to go to the games on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Thursday and Saturday in Camelback Ranch, as well as Friday at the game over in Mesa for the Chicago Cubs facility. Got to go watch those games. It was a really cool experience being able to go to the facility. When you get there, one of my high recommendations is get to the fields early. Go on some of the backfields. When you go to the backfields, and we went in over by the Chicago White Sox entrance, you go back into the backfields, you'll notice that there's facilities set up for a lot of the major league players. So the fields that are closer to the major league side is where the major leaguers go. So I got to experience and watch a little bit of Shohei Ohtani throwing a bullpen. That was super sweet. You had all the major league guys doing drills on some of the fields. They would come out. You can get autographs from each one of the players if you get there early enough and are able to get in line, which is really difficult to do. So I highly recommend getting there right at 9 o'clock if you're looking for any type of autograph to go ahead and get there. But one of my favorite things to be able to do at these games is just being able to go towards the backfields for the minor league side. So when you get to the Dodgers spring training facility, which I don't believe it is like this for every single spring training facility, you can go ahead and walk around to the backfields. You can walk around past all of the different all-stars. They have banners for different all-stars. They have different baseballs commemorating MVP experiences. And you'll get to a point where there's some stuff taking place on some of the backfields, which was really cool because those are the players that I've gotten to know over the course of the past couple of years in Great Lakes. I got to see different bunting drills with some of the catchers, Yainer Fernandez, Frank Rodriguez, Nelson Quiros. I got to see batting practice with a lot of the guys. I also got to see, and this was one of the really cool experiences that happened on Saturday when I was at the game. I was there on Saturday. There was a live pitcher versus batter matchups, live simulated type games, even though simulated matchups for individual pitchers. I got to see that for Patrick Copen, which, by the way, incredibly excited that Patrick Copen, right-handed pitcher within this system, really talented as well, that he's able to go out there and just go out there and pitch again, just like he was doing before the injury took place at the end of the 2024 season. In case you don't know, he was pitching in Great Lakes and had a comebacker come right back at him, missed the rest of the season towards the end of the 2024 season. He was back out there. He was facing the likes of Taylor Young, of Sean McClain, who we saw got a base hit today, Alex Freeland was on there taking some swings in the backfield. We also got to see Luke Fox go out there and pitch on the backfields. And what was really cool about that is people would just walk up. I'm sitting on the bleachers, and here comes General Manager Brandon Gomes come right there. Here comes Mark Pryor and all the pitching coaches. Dave Anderson was part of that group as well. Got to say hi to him for a little bit. What's really cool about spring training is they provide a lot of different access to you as fans to be able to go and experience and get to see some of these players in action, not just on the minor league side, but also at the major league side. There's loud cheers when Freddie Freeman walked out and was just going out just to go out onto the fields. It's just a really cool experience. And then you get to the actual games, and the games are a lot of fun. The experience at Camelback Ranch is really good. The experience that I had at the Chicago Cubs facility was really good. It's packed crowds at both of these because people are excited for the return of baseball, and baseball is back, and that is what I'm excited about. Yes, right now, if you look at the final score for the spring training games for the Dodgers, it doesn't look too good. The Dodgers lost 8-1 to the Cincinnati Reds today, but that does not matter. What matters right now is baseball is back, and these guys are currently fighting for their spots, fighting for their journeys to make it onto the major league roster for the 2025 season. And that's going to be something that's going to be really interesting to watch. Before we continue and before we dive into a little bit of that, some of the key takeaways from that, as well as some Q&A from you guys. I want this to be a little bit more of a interactive show with you guys to be able to answer your questions based on what I've seen, either from going and looking at the game in spring training from my experience there, or from what we've all seen in spring training. That's something I want to look at. First, I want to welcome you guys in. Orlando, hello to Dodgers Dogs for you. Carol S., thank you very much for joining us. I do not like not winning as well. Mr. Classic, nice spring training hat. Yeah, absolutely what it is. It was something that don't get to go to Arizona very often. It was an experience that I had with me and my dad, which was really cool to be able to experience something like that. And so I'd say, hey, what is something that you can get to commemorate the experience? Might as well get the spring training hat. Victoria Secret, thank you very much for joining us. We'll get into some of the experience today as well. Let's see. Carol S., what was your highlight of the spring training trip? Highlight had to be, one, just being able to go out to the games with my dad had to be one of the highlights. If you're talking about the actual on-the-field facility, it was interacting with a lot of the different players. I got to interact with the catchers that I had mentioned, Q, Nelson Quiros, Yainer Fernandez, and Frank Rodriguez. Got to talk a little bit to Sean McClain and Taylor Young. Carson Hobbs was there as well. Austin Chubb and Dave Anderson, as I've mentioned, are two coaches that I've gotten to know with Great Lakes, as well as some parents of some of the players that recognized me and stopped and called me over to interact with a little bit. That interaction is really cool. Also got to say hi to Mike Salas, who is there on the backfields as well. So just the interaction that you're able to have with a lot of the different personalities throughout the game, and the fact that you're watching the game in very nice weather when it's currently extremely cold and snowy in the great state of Michigan. Those are some really cool things that I was able to have. Justin Yamas, thank you very much for joining us. My grandfather's in the chat. Kenneth Hall, thank you very much for joining us. So what I want to talk a little bit about right now is just provide a little bit of an update of where things are at. Yes, there is a little bit of on-field Dodgers not pulling off and winning. But through the seams, I think we're starting to get a little bit of a picture of where this roster currently might be going into the start of the 2025 season. Let's first start off with the start of the rotation. We got to see both Tony Gonsolin and Dustin May in action for the Los Angeles Dodgers. And I think these two guys are going to play pretty critical roles for the Dodgers because they're going to be able to provide bulk innings for the Dodgers and what they're able to do. You talk about both of their situations, and this is something that Casey and I have talked about quite a bit for both of these guys. Dustin May is coming back from injury. He's a guy that has not pitched a whole lot of innings, really hasn't gone over 50 innings at all throughout his major league career. I think there might be one instance where he went over 50 innings. His stuff is ridiculous. He was on the mound yesterday, and you look at the spin on some of his pitches, it was 3,500, I believe is what I saw for the spin on, I believe it was his curveball, which is beyond some of the best spin in the game of baseball. From coming back from injury is just absurd of what he's able to do. You pair that with the fact that I think he can generate a little bit more heat with his velocity on his fastball, and that combination is going to be absolutely lethal for a guy like a Dustin May. He currently has 1 year left on his contract and does not have the ability to be optioned down to the minor leagues, which means if the Dodgers are going to have Dustin May be part of his club, it has to be at the major league level. So, if Dustin May is able to keep healthy, I fully expect him to be part of this Dodgers team, whether that be in the rotation, whether that be in the bullpen. It's a really good question. Honestly, I could go either way. All I want is Dustin May to be healthy as part of this team. And then you throw in Tony Gonsolin, and he's another one of these guys that's fighting for a spot in the rotation, fighting for a spot on this roster. Technically, he does have one in minor league option. However, I think we can all state and put that Tony Gonsolin, if he is healthy, if he's ready to go, likely has a spot on this major league roster. Yes, the math does not look good, but what's going to be intriguing over the course of the next couple of days is I believe his next outing is going to be of a piggyback variety, meaning that there's going to be a starter that's going to be starting, and then Tony Gonsolin would come in a spring training game that could come in during the second to third inning. In a big league type of setting, this is something that they actually implement a lot at the minor league levels. They use a first starter, and then they have a piggyback starter come out after them. Could that be something that is implemented with a Dustin May and Tony Gonsolin to put both of them onto this roster? If we're starting the season with a 5-man rotation, which is something that the Dodgers have alleged going into the season, I think the expectation is that this is going to be a fight between Dustin May and Tony Gonsolin for that 5th spot, with the other roster spots in the rotation being Yoshi Yamamoto, Tyler Glasnow, Blake Snell, and Roki Sasaki. If you're talking about a 5-man rotation for at least the first month of the season, inevitably that would leave one spot for a Dustin May or Tony Gonsolin. Unless they utilize that rotation spot as a piggyback type of spot, meaning the 5th game, they have like a Dustin May, Tony Gonsolin piggyback start. Could be something that they try. They could move one of these guys to the bullpen. However, as it currently states, and this is further evidenced by the fact that I don't think Evan Phillips is going to start on opening day on this roster. There could be a lot of questions about even a guy like Michael Kopech, whether he's going to be able to start on this roster. I think the expectations for both of these guys is that if they are healthy going into the season, that they likely are going to start the season on the big league roster. For Dustin May, because they have no other choice but to put him on the roster, and for Tony Gonsolin, because he has a pedigree of being a major league pitcher. That is my expectations. Could be completely wrong on a lot of that, and it could be something where if these guys are healthy, they could look at the depth that they have on the pitching side and say that we're okay with going ahead and trading one of these guys. However, I think one of the things that is a painful reminder, and I am grateful that he is okay, but what happened with Bobby Miller during the first spring training game when that comebacker came, which was incredibly scary being there at the ballpark, and I'm so glad that he seems to be doing fine and will be returning to the mound. I think that is a reminder of what can happen with pitchers in an instant. That wasn't something that was the fault of Bobby Miller in any way, shape, or form, but that was something that happened as a result of a comebacker that came back to them and a freak injury that happened. And it's a reminder that for the Dodgers in particular, because they've had a lot of different injuries on the pitching side, it is good to have a lot of depth. And if you have Dustin May and Tony Gonsolin as part, both who have the ability to be able to be starters in this rotation, it's not a bad thing to have, especially if you're going to be waiting over the course of the next couple of months for the return of a Shohei Ohtani, for the return of a Clayton Kershaw to be part of this rotation. Having both of these guys ready to go is not a bad thing for this Dodgers club to be able to have, because at an instant, things can change really quickly for this club. Super glad that Bobby Miller seems to be okay. I hope that there's nothing like that for the Dodgers or for any other teams throughout the rest of spring training. Obviously, we saw a very similar situation in the game against San Diego yesterday. Pitching side, I think it has a lot to do with who is healthy, who is ready to go, as opposed to a lot of spring training battles for the pitching side. Yes, there might be one or two spots that players are fighting for, and you're talking about a rotation. You could say Dustin May versus Tony Gonsolin as part of that last starting rotation battle is a battle worth looking forward to, because one of those guys could be moved to the bullpen. However, there's just not a whole lot of spots that are available for a lot of these arms, and it's going to be rather dependent on who is healthy with these guys, especially because if you look at the number of spots that are available for guys to move up or move down within this organization, most of these guys are signed to a big league contract, which means they don't have the ability to be sent down to the minor league level, which means if they are healthy, if Alex Vesia, Tanner Scott, Kirby Yates, all of these different relievers are healthy, Blake Trinan, they're going to be at the major league level. So it's going to be interesting to see the continued battle with each one of these guys, and for the guys like the non-roster invites. And this is something that's really important to keep in mind, is because these guys are not just fighting for the opening day roster spot for the Dodgers. They're fighting for a chance or an opportunity to be called upon at some point down the line this season, whether it be with the Dodgers or whether it be for another organization. So when we see a guy like a Sam Carlson, or we see a Jose Hernandez, or we see any one of these guys that is a considered a non-roster invite, particularly the veteran type players, Giovanni Gallegos, it is not necessarily exclusively that they're fighting for the opening day roster spot, although that is certainly something they're fighting for. The Dodgers are also giving these guys opportunities to prove themselves, so that if a game happens in May and they just need some innings and they need somebody that they can add to their 40-man roster, call up, and not be afraid to designate for them for assignment if a reliever goes down, that could be something that they are healthy, ready to go, and they're trying to prove themselves in these types of moments. So that's something that's important to look for with these non-roster invites, not just for the pitching side, but for the veteran side as well. So pitching side, there's some compelling battles that we're looking at, and we'll get into some of those. Maybe Casey and I'm sure we'll talk about those on Wednesday when we dive a little bit into the pitching battles. The most compelling battle, though, for me, remains on the position player side. And if you were watching my show over the past couple of shows that I did by myself, you'll know that the 13th position battle is one of the most compelling battles to me, and we're starting to see it shape out a little bit without a clear front runner. So the 13th position player battle, how I am looking at it right now, which could be something that it might not be completely accurate how I'm framing it, but if you do a lot of the math and you assume that Chris Taylor is going to make the roster, which perhaps is a bad assumption on my part. However, in order for any of these players to directly replace Chris Taylor, I think is going to take a lot from these guys. And to this point in spring training, we have not seen any one of these players completely break out and show that they should be the one replacing a CT3, a Chris Taylor. And it's also something to note, extremely small sample size. We're only talking about 5 game sample size, which most of these players don't play in every single one of these games. So very limited on our conclusions. But the 13th position player battle that I've talked about quite a bit has to do with Hae-Sung Kim Andy Pages, or James Outman. And the reason why those players are so important is if you look at this team where some of the holes could be, it likely is up the middle, meaning second base, shortstop, although Mookie Betts is playing shortstop. And by the way, Mookie Betts is working extraordinarily hard to make sure that he is the best shortstop he possibly can be. So until further notice, he is the shortstop of this club. So really it's second base and center field, positions in which Hae-Sung Kim plays a lot of second base. James Outman and Andy Pages both have the ability to play center field. And each one of these guys has individual strengths or individual things that we continue to look at going forward in spring training. Let's start with the player that I think, at least initially, right now, if I had to take a guess, likely would be the front runner. And this is just barely being a front runner based on a lot of different reporting and stuff that I've seen. Hae-Sung Kim. Based on the Dodgers wanting to give him every single opportunity to make this club because he provides a lot of different skill sets that he has, I think he's going to get a lot of different opportunities in a wide variety of different roles. So for Hae-Sung Kim, you've seen him play second base, and I think his defense is going to be solid at second base. You've seen him at the shortstop position, which I still have to see a lot more of in order to get a gauge on how well he's going to do at the shortstop position. But you've also seen Hae-Sung Kim start to make the transition or add a little bit of versatility in center field, a position that he is not used to, a position that he did not partake in. And if he's going to have a role on this team, it makes so much sense for him to add versatility to center field as part of his mix, because that is one of the positions of need for this Dodgers club. You look at the players that are on this roster that are not part of that group. You look at the players that could play center field that are not James Outman and not Andy Pages, because if Hae-Sung Kim is on this club and Chris Taylor is on this club, you ain't having Andy Pages, you're not having James Outman on your big league roster, which means you need other players to play center field. You have Tommy Edman and you have Kike Hernandez as the two players that I have identified that likely would get the spot in center field. There's not a whole lot of guys that can play that position. Teoscar Hernandez, Michael Conforto will not play center field. Maybe you could throw out a Chris Taylor in center field in some rare cases, but adding an additional player like a Hae-Sung Kim, if he's going to be somebody that's going to be on this club, even if he's not going to be always a starting player, but he's going to play at least a pretty predominant role, having that ability to play center field, I think, is something that could be incredibly valuable, and that frees up Tommy Edman to play a little bit at second base. Or if Mookie Betts needs to take a couple days off at the shortstop position, it frees Tommy Edman to play a little bit of shortstop, split some time with Miguel Rojas. I think it makes a lot of sense because that is an area of need for the Dodgers. Thing with Hae-Sung Kim is I'm not necessarily completely worried about the defense. I'm skeptical, particularly about his defense at the shortstop position. I think he's going to be great at the second base position, and I think he probably would be solid in center field, though he probably needs a little bit more additional reps. What I'm going to be looking for the rest of the spring for him is consistent contact. Does he have the ability, and does he retain the ability to see the ball well at the plate? If he has plate discipline, and if he's able to make solid contact, even if it's not necessarily base hits, but I'm looking for some of those line drives. What I don't want to see every single time is don't want to see the ball always on the ground. Although he certainly can utilize his speed, if he's able to get some of those line drives, and if he's able to draw a decent number of walks, his speed, his defensive versatility, especially with both up the middle and in center field, is going to be something that's going to prove extraordinarily valuable for him. That is something I'm going to be looking for, and something that he's going to get every single opportunity to be able to do so over the course of the next couple of weeks of spring training. So it'll be interesting to see what he's able to do. Next person that I want to talk about is the person who has struggled to this point in spring training. However, his last at-bat might have shown something a little bit more that could be in there. It's probably the player that has and I think this is rightly put, has to have the best spring training in order to make this club, even though he is a really good fit theoretically wise on this club. It's James Outman. James Outman has had a lot of struggle in spring training with swing and miss. And you saw that early in the game today. I believe he had a couple pair of strikeouts, which added on to several other strikeouts that he's had throughout the course of spring training. What I will point you to as a potential sign of hope is not just his last at-bat in which he had the double, not just the result of it, but the process-wise and what he was able to go through in that at-bat, fighting off different pitches, working the count. I believe it went to a full count when James Outman went out there and was able to stroke that double for a center field. If he can continue to do a little bit of something like that, work those counts a little bit deeper, not always fall into an immediate hole and then swing and miss at the last pitch. With his ability to provide consistently solid defense in center field, which is going to be needed for this outfield, it's going to be needed with Conforto and Teoscar Hernandez at the corners. James Outman provides really good defense out in center field. It's just about, has the ability to make consistent enough contact, and what is his confidence level at the plate? We've seen with James Outman, he can get on a roll. Is that going to be able to continue going forward, or is there going to be far too much swing and miss in his game to make it to where he's not going to be able to stick at the big league level? That is going to be something to continue to watch. That last plate appearance, though, for James Outman, I was really encouraged by. Still need to see a lot more continuing to go forward, and hopefully he can make a little bit more consistent contact as he works in spring training. And that leaves the last person that is fighting for that 13th position spot, as I have alluded to or have talked about. It's Andy Pages. The defense in center field for Andy Pages remains the biggest obstacle for me for him making this roster. We know what he's able to do, or what he could be capable of at the plate. Against left-handed pitchers is ridiculous. Versus righties, there's still a little bit of question, but as we saw on some of the broadcasts, even though it was not a great day at the plate, he can also tattoo a pitch and hit it for a long ways, as we saw with a deep foul ball that he had, I believe, in his last plate appearance. He can still be a really good player at the plate. But what are you going to get in center field? I do not believe, and this is something that has come up throughout his development at the minor league level, I do not believe that he is defensively a good fit in center field, which we saw and was apparent in the game against the Chicago Cubs, I believe, on Friday, when he completely misread a ball in center field. Made up for it a couple days later, I believe it was yesterday, when he had a pretty solid catch, a little bit of diving catch in center field. That is something that's really good to see. But there's these misplays that make you question a little bit what he's going to be able to do defensively in center field and how good of a fit he's going to be on this roster if he can't cover center field. Because if it is something where he does not have the ability, or you have no confidence in Andy Pages playing center field, he does not really have a role on this club. Because you would put him on the bench and you would maybe platoon him with Michael Conforto. But as I've stated in the past, if he is right-hander going up exclusively against left-handed pitching, that platoon maybe sees 120 plate appearances if we're talking about that matchup. You're not getting a lot of value out of Andy Pages if you're doing that. So the question still remains throughout the spring training, even more than some of the struggles that we've seen offensively for him at the plate. It continues to be, what are you getting at the center field position for Andy Pages? And if the answer is, I don't know what we're getting at the center field position for him this season, and we don't trust him, then the likely answer is, okay, we'll probably move in a different direction and likely get somebody else, either James Outman or Ha-Seong Kim, to be able to fill in that role. Perhaps Kike Hernandez, Miguel Rojas, and some of these guys take a little bit more of an increased role to spread out some of the different plate appearances. But then that leaves you with Andy Pages at the minor league level. And the question that I continue to ask is, if he is sent down to the minor league level, what are you planning on doing with him in 2026? What are you planning on doing with him next year? Because you will not have the ability to send him down to the minor leagues next year. And if we're talking about projecting out the future, are you projecting him to be a center fielder for the Dodgers in 2026? What about, so if that is not the case, then you would project him for one of the corner outfields, in which case, do you want to go after a Kyle Tucker? Do you want to see what Dalton Rushing is going to be able to do in one of the corners? All of these different questions start to limit some of the role that Andy Pages has, in which case, how much of a need is the depth for Andy Pages at this club? And what is the role necessarily for him? That is something that continues to be a question, and based on what I've seen so far, there still is a lot that needs to be answered for him going forward at this club. Doesn't mean that I don't think he's an incredibly talented player. Obviously I do, and I've talked about him quite a bit on the show as a player who could be an impact player, and a player that I wanted to see get a starting corner outfield role at the start of the offseason. That has not transpired, and so he has to show something at the center field position. If not, his role becomes much more of a question on this club. And in which case you have to talk about what is the best version of Andy Pages and how can we get the most value out of him, whether that be with his bat, with his offense for the future, or whether that be looking to see if you can look for some type of trade for him. Because one of the cool things about spring training is we've started to see a little bit of a breakout, at least to this point in spring training. I got to see a couple of the catches because I was sitting right down the left field line, basically 50 feet in front of me, not far in front of me, was Zaire Hope going out, making a diving play, going out, making a jumping catch in left field. He has been incredibly impressive at the plate so far in spring training, and with his glove. He's playing with an insane level of confidence, like he knows that he belongs out there. He is not going to make the opening day club. That is not my argument for this. I hope that he starts the season in Great Lakes, not for necessarily his sake, but selfishly I want to see him in action. But with Zaire Hope, he was part of the package that the Dodgers got back in a trade for a Michael Busch. In this trade that sent Michael Busch to the Chicago Cubs, because the Dodgers did not have a role, did not have a place for Michael Busch. So instead of keeping him and holding on to him as depth in case they needed him, in case they needed somebody to fill in at the second base, third base, first base position, they saw a player that had a lot of potential and value that was not worthy to be at the minor league level, and said, you know what? We're going to utilize him to get some value out of him. And they returned the player that you're seeing in spring training, Zaire Hope. Still a long ways away. Might never make it to the major leagues. But the talent is absolutely there. He is incredibly talented. As well as Jackson Ferris. Andy Pages, I think either should start the season at the big league club, or there needs to be very serious consideration for him, because I think there could be an opportunity to turn Andy Pages into something like that if you do not see a future. Remember, in 2026, he must be at the big league roster, or you have to designate for him for assignment because he will be out of minor league options. Something to think about. Also, with this position player battle, I just wanted to address this. You're seeing some other breakout players coming out in spring training. Yes, super small sample size. We got to see a lot more. But a player like David Bodie is hitting 667 to start the spring training. He's doing really well. Really encouraged by that. I'm not necessarily projecting, nor do I think that he would start the season at the big league level, assuming that there aren't any injuries. The only reason I say that is because some of his primary positions consist of third base and first base, both of which are occupied by Max Muncy and Freddie Freeman. And so assuming both of those guys are healthy to start the season, I just don't see a whole lot of time for him to be able to play, although perhaps he could play a little bit of second base. I think he's had a little bit of experience of that on the field. I don't think there's going to be a role for him up the middle at center field. And those are the positions that I'm looking at providing a little bit more depth and coverage for on this last roster spot. Really good story. Could be a possibility to come up at some point throughout the course of the season, especially if there is an injury. And with what he's showcased at the plate so far, really encouraging. I'm just not expecting it right now. Similar story and situation, and this one is incredibly frustrating for us here at Dodgers Daily with being fans of him for quite a long time. Hunter Fiducia is having a really good spring so far. He had the home run the other day, just had a lot of really good hits, really good contact, controlling the pitching staff while it's been Austin Barnes and Hunter Fiducia as the primary catchers. A lot of encouraging signs for him. He continues to be the third catcher, meaning he is waiting for basically Austin Barnes or Will Smith to get injured. And that sucks for him. He should be on a major league club at the very least as a backup catcher. He's just not getting that opportunity unless somebody's injured. But what he is showcasing is not just for the Dodgers, but for every single other club. These are my skill sets. These are my capabilities. And that is a good thing for the Dodgers, not just because they have a really good third option at the catcher, as well as a Dalton Rushing, who is another option that is at the catching position. But that also provides them with the ability to call on him and perhaps leverage him as well in some type of trade situation if that becomes necessary and apparent. Although it becomes a little bit more difficult depending on where they are evaluating Dalton Rushing's progression. As long as they still want him to get work at the minor league level, Dalton Rushing that is, it becomes a little bit more difficult, I should say, to see Hunter Fiducia be moved, although he certainly should be and should be getting a lot of that opportunity. Those are a lot of my initial thoughts of where things are sitting with spring training. I'm not freaking out on a whole lot of stuff. Obviously, with the game today, Tyler Glasnow gave up a couple of runs, although if you look back on some of the footage, the CNI single, the loop out into the outfield, and then the double, it kind of led to those two runs that were on the board against Tyler Glasnow. I'm not worried about him. He was moving the ball pretty well. Got a pair of strikeouts as well. That swing and miss up is really what I'm looking for a guy like him. We got to see Kirby Yates go out there and perform pretty well. Tanner Scott did give up a home run against him, as well as Jack Dreyer gave up a home run. I'm not worried about either of them. You saw both of them, the two lefties, go out there and still be able to get some good swing and miss stuff. So there's still a lot of really good signs coming out from spring training, but the question still remains for this roster. There's not a lot of room to be able to add on and join this roster, which means for a lot of these guys that are fighting for spots, fighting for opportunities, these moments really do matter. And these opportunities to be able to join in and be able to see the skill sets that they have, to be able to go ahead and prove themselves on the field, which ultimately should be the place where they are proved is a results-oriented game. They're going to have to showcase their skill sets. They're going to have to showcase what they are able to do, and especially on the position player side. And we'll go ahead and throw Chris Taylor on there because he had, I believe, 3 strikeouts during the game today. He was hitting pretty well to start the spring training today. Just not a great game for him. Chris Taylor, Hye-Sung Kim, Andy Pages, James Outman all have a lot to prove, all have a lot more to showcase if they want to be on this Los Angeles Dodgers team, and not just if they want to be on the team, but if they want to have a prominent role on this team. Another factor to keep in mind is what is the role that they are fighting for. If they are fighting for a bench role, rarely seen playing time role, perhaps the evaluation or perhaps a player that the Dodgers choose is different from the one in which case they actually think is the best player for this team. So super fun to be able to talk about this. I've got a few more minutes that I can go ahead and interact with you guys. We'll get to a few more chats, a few more talks from you guys. Take a few more questions for you guys. Let's continue to go on to this. Sammy Boy Smith, thank you very much for joining us right now. Mr. Classic, I'm just sad about the guys who are going to get traded or go back to the farm system. I'm not necessarily, it depends on which one of these guys are. There are certain players, if they're stuck at the minor league level, like I mentioned, Hunter Fiducia, then I feel something for them. If we're talking about a player like Zaire Hope, I don't think he's going to play for the Dodgers. I think he's going to be a player that's going to continue his development at the minor league level, and he's showcasing his skill set a lot right now, which is really positive, really encouraging to see him go ahead and do that. He also says, you should move out to LA. We should move Great Lakes Loons to SoCal too. I disagree with that, particularly with the Great Lakes Loons. I hope they remain a Dodger affiliate for a long time, and I think there's a lot of value with having a team in your organization that is in a completely different culture, completely different environment than everybody else. Especially with a lot of these guys that are international players coming in from Latin America. They go to Arizona. They go to the complex. They go to Rancho Cucamonga. They get to go to Southern California. Still somewhat recognizable in some of the cultures that they had, or at least climate-wise, it is. Then you go to Great Lakes. You go to the middle of nowhere. You go to Midland, Michigan, and get to be part over there. And I think that culture change, that difference, is actually something that's really positive for these guys to be able to experience. So I think Great Lakes is something that's great. I also love it here, the state of Michigan. And by the way, Great Lakes Loons should give a shout out to the promotions team. They just released a promotional calendar. And if you have not had the chance to watch the video that they released for that, highly recommend watching the video. They do a phenomenal job over there. But I appreciate the support, and I'd love to be able to visit Southern California, visit Dodger Stadium one of these days, and probably Rancho Cucamonga as well, be able to visit some of the other affiliates. Sammy Boy Smith's not a huge fan of what CT3 and James Outman are doing so far. Certainly has been a lot of swing and miss with a lot of those guys, which is part of their game. It's something that we know both about Chris Taylor and James Outman, and it's about those other moments and how can they create a little bit more consistency at the plate. James Outman, you know what you're going to get defensively. It's going to be rock solid in center field. With Chris Taylor, he's going to provide some of that versatility, which I know there's this theory that there's too many versatile players, too many players with too much positional versatility. I actually don't describe to that. If every player could be versatile in there, I would absolutely love that. Doesn't mean that you have to force it onto them, but having a player with positional versatility can move around. It's not necessarily a bad thing at all. Chris Taylor, he's got to find a little bit more consistent contact. I will point out, and this is something that I point out quite a bit when talking about Chris Taylor, his last 4 months of the season in 2024 statistically were as good as Kike Hernandez with glasses. So if you love Kike Hernandez with glasses in the regular season, not talking about his postseason, but in the regular season, Chris Taylor put up the exact same numbers June through the end of September. Something to think about when talking about Chris Taylor CT3. CNAV, Kristen Navarro, thank you very much for joining us. Good to see you as well. Kenneth Hall, I heard Bobby Miller will start to throw again. Yeah, I think at some point he's going to start to throw again, and I think that's going to be really exciting to see him go out there and compete again. As Carol S. says, you don't think Miller is in the running for the 5th spot. How I would say it is a much more significant uphill battle for Bobby Miller. Not because Bobby Miller isn't talented or worthy of a spot in this rotation, but because of the math and because of history. Dustin May can't be sent down to the minor leagues, which means that if Bobby Miller were to leapfrog him, he would have to be part of this bullpen, or he would have to be designated for high assignment or traded. Not outside the possibility, especially because Dustin May only has 1 year left, and if they want to get some value out of him, perhaps the way that they go ahead and do that, if they have enough depth, is trading Dustin May. But he doesn't seem like a very good option, as well as Tony Gonsolin, who, yes, could be optioned at the minor leagues, but because he has a long track record of being successful at the big leagues, as opposed to Bobby Miller, and especially if this unfortunate comebacker against Bobby Miller is something that could help derail the start of his spring training. Remember, these spring training games, very limited in opportunity. We're talking about only until the second week of March that you're going to have these spring training games until the team's going to fly over and start to get ready for the series in Japan. It's a very limited time frame, and especially with Bobby Miller starting to play catch, when he's able to get back on the mound, he doesn't have as much time to be able to prove himself as the big league starting pitcher that we know he can be. So I think unfortunately that took an opportunity that was there for him and made it a little bit more difficult to be able to get that. It was already incredibly difficult because of the math, but now with the time frame that he has, that the Dodgers have, which is very limited right now because of the series in Japan, it becomes a little bit more difficult to be able to see him be able to do that. Christian Navarro, CT3 with 3 Ks. Outman was 1 with 3, but 2 Ks, ran into 1 and got the double. It was certainly a lot of strikeouts today. I'm not going to hold anyone overly accountable for just one single game sample size and say this player is no good. But it is something to keep in mind, and it's something to look for a trend. You don't want to take in a single evaluation, a single point, and say, hey, James Outman had a double. He's going to be the exact same player he was in 2023. You also don't want to play a CT3 who, before this game, was hitting really well in spring training, had 3 strikeouts, and say, hey, this is the type of player that he is going to be. Wait for some of the trends to see how things shape out, and then make an evaluation for there. Although there certainly is a microscope on these guys, those 2 players, as well as with Andy Pages, as well as with Hae-Sung Kim, because those are the guys fighting for roster spots. Let's see, continuing on right here. Sammy Boy Smith, thank you so much for the 149 super chat. Really appreciate it. We'll get to see Nav super chat as well in just a minute. Sammy Boy Smith, incredibly generous, incredibly thankful for that. You're absolutely amazing in the comments section. Happy to take more questions. Let's see. I don't know how to pronounce this. Starts with an A and R. Question, is it concerning if the Dodgers don't win spring training games? It's looked flat so far, and they are getting blown out. At this point, I'm not necessarily concerned about it. It is something I think to take note of, that the Dodgers are losing these games, and they're giving up a significant amount of runs in doing so. I think you have to look at who is giving up the runs, and you have to look at the situation in which those runs are given up, and then take an evaluation from there. And like with the position player side, start to look for some of these trends. If the next outing, Tanner Scott goes out there, walks a couple guys, gives up another home run, and then he does that again, it's starting to look a little bit more like a trend. Or if you look at some of the underlying metrics and see a little bit more concerning signs, that could be something to take note of. As far as the actual end result of the game, this could be highly influenced by some of the players in the Dodgers, some of the players that are part of the second team that's going in. It is something to take note of, but I'm not overly alarmed if you go ahead and watch the games and look for some of those signs, because these guys are working on their individual things. They're not necessarily looking exclusively for, we have to win this game. It is, we have to be ready to go for the start of the season, and we have to make sure that we're in the right place. These guys are veterans. They know what they need to do to get themselves right to start the season, and because they've had that track record, I'm not going to question them too much so far. Let's see. Continuing on right here, Aaron Nedick, Vesia, Yates, Scott, Trinan. Love seeing all 4 of them today. Runs allowed or not. Yeah, it was amazing to be able to see those guys go out there. Christian Navarro, CNAV, watching Bonda, Yates, Scott, Trinan, and Vesia come out of the pen was insane. Gave up a couple of home run shots, but that's okay, and don't care if it's 15 home runs. We have all the firepower in the bullpen. Yes, absolutely we do. Craig Osterberg, thank you very much for joining us as well. Let's see, continuing on with a couple, we'll get to a couple bit more before I've got to get going in just a minute. CNAV, hope is exciting. Baseball, can't wait for him to be ready to come up. Haven't seen much from DePaula yet. Yeah, be patient with Josue. He's one of those guys that is going to wait for a lot of his different pitches to be able to go up there. So I think right now, based on some of the numbers, I think he's got a 400 on base percentage, takes a lot of walks, and that's from a very limited sample size. He's still going to be exciting to be able to see his continued progression as he continues to go forward for the big league club. It was also cool to see Sean McLean, Doc start Sean McLean against his brother today. Yeah, if you listen to the show, Sean McLean is somebody we talked about quite a bit at the shortstop position. Spent a lot of time between Rancho and Great Lakes last season, potentially starting the season with Great Lakes, although he is getting a lot of opportunities, if you've noticed, in spring training during the course of this spring training venture, taking the most, if not all of the reps at the shortstop position for the minor league level. It's really cool to see him get that opportunity right now, and he's something that they're leaning into right now. Continuing on, just a couple more we have right here. Aaron Nenick, Austin, any tips for a guy attending his first 2 games at Camelback this weekend? Yeah, if you're attending Camelback Ranch for this weekend, one, I highly recommend, I'm assuming the games are starting at 1 o'clock Arizona time, so that would be Mountain Time. The gates to Camelback Ranch open at 9 o'clock in the morning. I highly recommend getting there during that time because there's going to be a lot of different cool opportunities that you're going to be able to see throughout Camelback Ranch. So get there early. If you're going to there, what we did is we went all the way basically to the right of the gate. There should be like an entrance gate that you can go ahead and walk in. That opens up right at 9 o'clock. And then you have the opportunity, if you want to go ahead and get some autographs, there are some players that are coming out. If you get there early enough, you might be able to line up, see some of the guys walk out. If you want to see some of the fields that they're going to be practicing on, it's those 2 fields that are closest to the actual spring training facility, the actual spring training stadium. So go ahead and check those out. They also have a section for some of the bullpens. So I got to see a Shohei Ohtani pitch a bullpen for a little bit. Emmett Sheehan was throwing, which was really encouraging to be able to see that. Justin Robleski, Robo, was out there pitching a bullpen as well. So they have that area. They also, if you go to the backfields as well, that's where there's not a whole lot of people necessarily back there, but it's really cool to be able to see some of the minor league players getting some work. So it depends on your goal. If you want to see some of the major league players get an autograph, I highly recommend lining up. There's some barricade that you can go to try to get some of those. If you just want to see some of them practice on those fields, you can go ahead and stand around and watch them get some practice on the fields. You can watch bullpen. Or if you want to take a look at some of the minor league players, you can go to the backfields. As far as the actual game type of thing, what's really cool about that, if you want to go get something from the team store, I actually recommend, because they actually open it up at 9 o'clock as well, looking at the team store right away when it's 9 o'clock, go ahead and look to see if you want to get something for yourself. And then if you're wanting food at the game, if you want to get it early before the game is done, sometimes the lines can be pretty long over there, so get some of the food right away. And then just walk around and enjoy being and watching a Dodgers game. Those are a lot of the recommendations that I would have going to Camelback Ranch. A lot of interactive experience that you can have, and you can make as much of it basically as you want to while you are there. CNAV with the $10 super chat. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much to you as well. Glad you had fun at spring training. We have another first timer in the chat going this weekend. Wish I was able to go for my 5th time. Yeah, it's awesome to be able to see just the fans' excitement going to spring training, going and enjoying this club of Dodgers baseball, because the Dodgers continue to invest in this organization. They continue to invest in these players and try to build the best team possible that they possibly could be. CNAV also has one of my spring training trips. We had a 5 o'clock game, so we went to the Reds complex and watched a minor league game. There were only a handful of people there, mostly scouts. It was a daytime minor league game. Yeah, that is something to keep in mind. I got the chance to see some of the minor league players, Patrick Copen and Luke Fox, and I'm sure there's more of them, go out there and pitch on the backfields. And you talk about what's cool about that is you have a lot of people that are important within this organization that'll just wander around. Brandon Gomes, just walk out. He was standing 10 feet away from me watching some of this action. You had Mark Pryor and a whole bunch of the different pitching coaching staff sitting on the other side of the bleachers watching this happen. So being able to wander around and watch all of this different action is something that is a unique experience that you're only really able to get at the fullest when you are at spring training. So something that I recommend going ahead and doing and trying to go ahead and watch if you are visiting spring training for the first time. And BC with the last comment, Austin is younger than most of the Dodgers quote-unquote prospects. It depends on which prospects that you're looking for. There's a lot of young, up and exciting coming prospects that are coming up through this system. I am younger than some of the guys, especially if they don't get an opportunity at the major league level. They might stick around for a little bit, but it's still really excited to be able to talk about that. Dodgers baseball is back, and we will continue to talk a lot more about that. I'm sure Casey will have more of his thoughts, perhaps on the game today. I don't know if he's wanting to release on the show on the game today, going into details about it. If you want to continue to follow along with us at Dodgers Daily, be sure to follow him particularly either on Instagram, on X, Twitter, or Facebook, or all these different platforms. He takes a lot of intentional time to create individual posts for a lot of players, especially the players that go out there and succeed. If you have success as a player within this organization, we want to make sure that you receive the due coverage that you have earned. And so if Sean McClain goes out there and hits a double, he's going to get some sort of recognition for that. If Ryan Seblet goes out there and pitches a scoreless inning, he's going to go out and get a post about that. Just continue to provide additional coverage. There will be more stuff that gets released here at Dodgers Daily. Go be sure to check us out. And we'll continue to keep an eye on these position player battles and on the pitching side as well. Things can change in a hurry. Things can change in an instant for this club. And we can starting to see some of the trends of where these battles might be taking place. The first 5 games of spring training have started. The next 5 will continue on throughout the course of this week, and they are incredibly important to watch for all of these different guys. It is not just spring training. The results necessarily of the game, the final score, does not matter. But for some of these position player battles, and for some of these younger guys, or some of these non-roster invites looking for an opportunity, it really does matter for them. So continue to look out for how this team continues to shape, how this team continues to evolve into the form of what it's going to be during the 2025 season. The Dodgers are hungry for another World Series championship, and I am fully expecting them to do everything they can and be fully ready to start the season when the team heads out for Japan. Coming up in the middle of March. I believe March 18th is going to be opening day at 3 o'clock in the morning on Pacific time. So that's going to be a fun morning to completely mess up everybody's sleep schedule. But until then, thank you very much for joining us. We will be back. I believe we should have a live show on Wednesday night, unless Casey's got some other plans. We should be live Wednesday night here, Dodgers Dawgs, part of the Dodgers Daily Network, talking more about the spring training action that has taken place. Tomorrow, I believe, is going to be the Dodger spring training debut of Blake Snell. That's going to be fun to watch. Be sure to tune in to Dodgers baseball when it happens tomorrow with spring training. Continue to follow us along here, Dodgers Daily, for more coverage of the Los Angeles Dodgers and for this 2025 Dodgers team. Until next time, though, thank you very much for tuning in, and go Dodgers.